one book was the catalyst for it all that helped me become a millionaire. And that book was, I want to start out by mentioning there are lots of amazing books out there and you should read as many as you can. Education is king. I constantly am reading new books that have changed my life and helped me become Kyle 2.0. When I was going to high school, I hated to read. I liked school. However, I hated when my teachers would give us a book report or they'd assign us a book to read. There was times where I read the Cliff Notes instead. There was times where I skipped the book and just wrote a report and still got an A. However, I hated reading. I couldn't stand it. I remember thinking at the time, I'm so young. I have my whole life ahead of me. You know how much freaking reading I'm going to have to do? And that thought was miserable. I hated reading. I was also horrible at remembering music. Also kind of weird at that age. Everyone was into music. I wanted to be into music. However, every time I would really sit down to try to memorize lyrics or the band names, they wouldn't stick. And I would think about it and try to come up with why. Why? And funny enough, my brain would tell me. It would tell me, you don't see the value. If I was to memorize these things, is this gonna help me along in my life? And the answer was no. And my brain wouldn't retain the information about music. And I felt the same way about a lot of those other books, that it just wasn't gonna help me become a better version of myself. But one book was the catalyst for it all that helped me become a millionaire. And that book, super popular, was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Rich Dad, Poor Dad was able to answer that question. I was able to see the value and it made me want to read more and read it again. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a simple book and story driven. That story was Robert Kiyosaki as a kid. He had a best friend and then they had their dads. Robert Kiyosaki's dad, he referred to as his poor dad, even though he got paid a high salary position. His friend's dad didn't have a lot of money, but he was entrepreneurial and eventually made millions. They would try new business opportunities. They would have questions. They would go to his friend's dad to ask him for advice. And he would constantly teach them lessons in investing, lessons in being an entrepreneur. That was right up my alley. That taught me a lot. I remember feeling as a kid, I could put myself into that story. Something you need to understand, that I am a firm believer in consistent thoughts become consistent actions, which helps determine who you are. It was inevitable I was going to start taking consistent action. And I would read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I would read other books on real estate, on investing, on personal development. I started to not just dream, but plan how I would own real estate and have cash flow from those properties, even as a teenager. And then eventually, having consistent actions, it would change who I was. That book was a catalyst and it took me off of the normal path. And I was slowly becoming the person I needed to become. One of the first biggest signs that it did that, when I look back, and at the time I didn't think anything of it, was when I bought my first house. I was young, I wasn't married, but I wanted a house and I knew I could get other people to help me pay for it. So I went and bought my first primary residence and rented out all the rooms, which is house hacking. I just didn't know what house hacking was at the time, but it made sense because of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So that was the first thing. Now jump forward with me in time. I got married. Investing, personal development is a huge part of my life, and I couldn't wait to share it with my new wife. She liked reading things like Harry Potter, and she could care less about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I have vivid memories of us having Audible and listening and taking turns on our books as we go on long road trips. And we would have rules that we couldn't listen to these books unless we were on the highway, and they would max out after a couple hours, which is different than a lot of what other couples do and just listen to music, etc. Go forward with me again in time. It's now time for us to buy our first house as a couple. The main reason to buy a house was to get a rental property. You would think, oh, we want our dream house. We actually had to live in it because we were going to get an FHA loan, so we did. We bought it. It became our primary residence, but we couldn't wait to get out of it and turn it into a rental property. When we were looking at all the houses, it had to check the box for a good rental before it being the exact house that we wanted to live in. And I'm thankful, and I attribute that to Rich Dad, Poor Dad and changing my mindset. Now, we're all different from each other. We're all gonna have different books that have changed our lives. If there are any books that have absolutely changed your life that you think are incredible, leave a comment below with that book. If I haven't read it, I would love to add it to my list. Now, if you haven't read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I highly recommend go and read it. We'll put a link in the description for you. That book has changed my life. It has made me buy my first house as a house hack. It's helped me buy my first rental property after being married. It has dramatically changed my life and has helped me become a millionaire. Becoming a millionaire isn't as hard as it used to be. There are lots of people that own a primary house right now where they have $250,000 of equity. It only takes 4 houses with that much equity to become a millionaire. And a millionaire isn't even that much money anymore. We all have to strive to become the next version of ourselves. Rich Dad, Poor Dad helped me become Kyle 2.0, and I am now striving to become Kyle 3.0. I will do so by reading books, continually growing to become the best I can by having consistent thoughts that I know will produce consistent action and that will help me become who I want to be. Guys, I cannot tell you how much I'm enjoying sharing my journey with you. We release a new video every Thursday, both to share this journey as I try to become Kyle 3.0 and so that you can become a better version of yourself as well. So stay tuned, watch the next video, see you then.